أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين يقولون ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين وجعلنا للمتقين إماما آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكرنا المسائب آل محمد عليهم السلام. May Allah increase in our reward for the commemoration of the difficulties of Ali Muhammad. Tonight's majlis is with regard to the commemoration of the martyrdom of the young daughter of Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam. While we know and we understand the significance of taking the Imam as a wasila and having a relationship with the Imam and understand his great position with Allah, it's important to understand that when we commemorate the shahadat of these personalities other than the Imam, it's because of the significance and the importance that the Imam taught us about these personalities as being an example. That we learn from the life of the Imam about the sanctity of different personalities and the different relationships that exist, and how it's important for us as well to maintain and monitor the significance of these relationships. What I mean to say is, a pious man's relationship is not just piety between him and Allah. A pious man's piety is demonstrated by his relationship between him and Allah and him and his society and humanity that exists around him. Which is why the Ahlul Bayt, our holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, didn't just teach society ibadat of Allah. They taught us the relationships with humanity. They taught us the connection with society. They taught us to manage and to build and how our interaction with community and makhluk of Allah should be as well. The commemoration of these personalities and of these events should be a lesson to us. It should be a process for us to learn. Not just simply our connection with Imam Hussain and with Allah, but what is the demeanor and the manner of our relationships with society. This is a very important aspect. We take a look and we see the verse that we began our discussion with from Surah Furqan is the dua of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ, those that say, رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. Oh Lord, look at the dua between the Ma'bud and the Abd. Look at the dua between Nabi Ibrahim and his Lord. He asks, he says, oh Allah, grant us in our wives and our children qurrata a'yun, the coolness of our eyes, the happiness and satisfaction of our souls. وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, and make us guides for the pious people. The significance of relations in family and the relations with children and the relations of our community and of our society are established through one of the understandings of this dua, that even when we ask Allah, look, we ask Allah, رَبَّنَا أَعْتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. That when we ask Allah, look how we ask Him, even for dunya we ask Him, for akhirah we ask Him. We ask for ourselves. But amongst the prosperity that a person has is having good relationships in his family, good relationships with his children, good relationships with his spouse, which is why this dua of Nabi Ibrahim is teaching us that one of the things that you ask Allah for is asking Allah for coolness of your eyes and satisfaction and pleasure, that your spouses, your children are people that Allah is pleased with. The understanding of the importance of children and the significance that children play as a role in our lives is not something to take casually. You see, our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, said, "Inna likulli shajaratin thamaratun, wa thamaratul qalbi al-walad." Our Prophet explained, he says that every tree has a fruit that it bears. And the fruit of the heart is children. Our Prophet goes through the process of explaining us the significance of these children, the importance of children, by showing that the fruits of your heart, that children are something that are desirous to have and that are important to have, and that they are the result of the fruit of your heart. We take a look at the fourth Imam elaborates on this. He says, "Min sa'adati ar-rajuli an yakuna lahu waladun yasta'inu bihim." That one of the great pleasures of life and satisfactions of life is that a man should have a child who is a helper for him, and that is a source of assistance for him in difficulty. These lessons teach us that don't look at children only in a material light. Don't look at the idea of having children as simply the process of, for example, that a name continues or wealth continues or society continues to see your position. These are the material benefits that are limited to the bounties of this world. If the Prophet is asking for children, or if the Prophet is discussing the beauty and benefit of children, if Imam Zainul Abidin is talking about children, every Imam and every member of the 14 Masumeen has discussed the benefits of children. It should be a demonstration that these children are connected to a higher relationship with Allah. And the point of tonight's conversation is to take a look and see that these relationships, when we see them on a day-to-day basis and we see them in context of our society, sometimes we normalize them as just a normal process of life. Rather, we want to ensure that we see the divine mercy and the divine connection that we attain with Allah by the presence of these relationships of children. Which is an important goal, and to understand that our children for us should be a way by which we reach to Allah, which is why the Prophet discusses them as something good, which is why Imam Zainul Abidin mentions that they are a part of the pleasures of life and a great satisfaction in life. Our Holy Prophet described, he says, إِنَّ الْوَلَدُ الصَّالِحِ رَيْحَانَةٌ مِّن رَيَاحِينَ الْجَنَّةِ. That an upright child is from the sweet-smelling, fragrant plants, is a sweet-smelling, fragrant plant from amongst the plants of heaven. When we look at children in society, and we look at our communities, we look at the environment, the culture that we live in impacts our image and understanding of the significance of our families, of our children, and at times, it can even give us a negative perspective or a harsh perspective that children are mouths to feed, responsibilities, bills walking around in front of us. When we approach and see children in this light, in a negative light, when we see our families in a negative light, that they are, for example, a ball and chain that holds us back, or that they are something that is disadvantageous to us in our life. We take something that Allah has created to be a comfort, a pleasure, a source of happiness for us, and we lose all of the great benefits Allah has placed in it for us. One of the aspects of the significance of this conversation is the contemporary studies that shows, that promotes a different type of culture in our society that comes to the conclusion. It says that a measure of happiness has demonstrated that people without children are happier in their lives than people with children. The conclusion that's driven by the article in a scientific light is to say that be careful before you have children. But the conclusion that it comes to in the mind of someone who balances the view of their life is that the opinion and the perspective of the world has shifted to a materialistic perspective. We judge and see our success and happiness in life on the basis of possession and freedom to possess that we have. And that children, because of the responsibility that's seen in terms of financial, fiscal, emotional, are seen as something as a negative aspect. But our goal is to never forget that Islam is a part of our perspective, that Islam guides us to what is good in this life and keeps us away from what is harmful in life. And when we look at even our children in this life, we should look at them with the perspective of how Islam views them. Which is why our Holy Prophet is teaching us again and again. He talks about children and shows the love for children, where he explains, he says, من سعادة الرجل الولد الصالح من سعادة الرجل الأولاده. All of these. أن أحب الأعمال إلى الله تعالى الصلاة على وقتها ثم الأولاد الصالح البر بالوالدين. These lessons, these ahadith that are teaching and talking about the aspect of building a relationship with our families and with our children are an instruction for us to see that children should not be seen as something negative, but seen as something that is a source of pleasure, that Allah has blessed us with children. Which is why we take a look and we see that even in the Quran are the example we began with is the statement of Nabi Ibrahim. But look and see. وَزَكَرِيَّا إِذْ نَادَ رَبُّهُ رَبِّي لَا تَذَرْنِي فَرْدًا وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الْوَارِثِينَ. That children are such a valuable item that even Nabi Zakaria prays for children. Our Prophet loved children, where he would even teach the parents to love their children and to show kindness to them. In a famous narration, a man comes to the Holy Prophet and he boasts with happiness because of the ignorant culture that existed before. He says, I have never kissed a child once in my life. After the man leaves, Rasulullah says, if it was in my perspective, I would say that this should be one of the people of hell who has never shown kindness to children. That we don't take these relationships lightly, that as a matter of fact, they're important and that they're a blessing for us to have, and that we see them as that blessing. Why? And the part of seeing them as a blessing is understanding that these children are something that continue to benefit us after we go, and even in their life, they're a benefit to us. Our Prophet says, أَكْرِمُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ وَأَحْسَنُوا عَذَابَهُمْ يُغْفَرْ لَكُمْ. That these children for us are a source of attaining the forgiveness of Allah. The Prophet makes a statement, he says, be kind to your children and teach them good manners. This kindness and teaching of your children will be a source of forgiveness with Allah for you. Now, this is one of the ways that Allah has opened his doors of mercy to us. There are examples where Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, explains, he says, I never prayed to have children with beautiful faces. I never asked Allah for the beauty in their bodies or how they look, but rather I asked Allah that my children should be who are obedient to Allah and fear Allah. so that when I look at my child, seeing him obedient to Allah, it will be a source of coolness to my eyes. These explanations and these ahadith teach us that our children are a source of comfort when they follow the right path, and it is our responsibility and relationship to guide them on the right path. To the extent we even see in the Holy Quran in Surah At-Tahrim, verse number 6, where Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, qu anfusakum wa ahlikum narum waquduha an-nasu wal hijaratu. Allah is giving the explanation, oh, those of you who believe, save yourselves and your families from the fire. That this instruction is giving us that Allah, when He has made them a coolness for our eyes, He has made them a source of comfort for us, and He has made them something beneficial for us and goodness in them, He's also put a responsibility upon us with regards to our children. That we have an obligation to our children to save them from the fire of hell and to give them a good education and to give them a good guidance. When someone came to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and asked him about this verse, how do we save our children from the fire of hell? How do we save our families from the fire of hell? The Imam explains, he says, اعملوا خيرا وذكروا به أهليكم فأدبهم على طاعة الله. That the Imam explains that yes, children are a coolness and comfort and a source of greatness and happiness in the eyes, but the obligation that you have to fulfill this obligation of saving them from the fire of hell and saving your families from the fire of hell. And the way that we do this is first and foremost, اعملوا خير وَذَكِّرُوا بِهِ أَهْلِيكُمْ. That first and foremost, do good deeds yourself. Behave in a good fashion yourself. Be a good example. Not like this famous statement, do as I say, not as I do. No, our children are those who learn by example and by seeing. One of the things that I'm sure many people are currently experiencing is that now that our children are in the process, many of them are doing homeschooling, that how much more difficult it is for a child to learn without a classroom, without other students around them, without a teacher in front of them setting the example, when the example that they have is only the screen in front of them. The realization we should come to, the understanding we should come to, the warning lights that should go off for us is to understand how significant our example in front of our children is. How much our children absorb and learn just by watching us. And that for these children to be the coolness of our eyes, and these children to be a flower, fragrant flower from the garden of heaven, we have to invest the work and the time to educate them through our example and our behavior of what does Allah want from them? What is the right way to behave? How do we perform good deeds in life? Don't simply tell them to do good. Show them, incorporate them in your lifestyle so that they see the example that Allah wants to see from them. Any lesson that a child needs to learn, they look by watching. And if we don't live that example and that value, how is it that we can then expect them to become better than us and lead a better quality life than we have and attain success in akhirah? Which is why Imam Sadiq explains, "I'malu khayri wa dhakkir bihi ahlikum." Do good deeds, behave in a positive manner, and remind your family by it, and show them and remind them constantly Allah is aware and watching and a part of their life. فَأَدِّبُهُمْ عَلَى طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ, and train them in the prayer and service of Allah. These are things that we do on a regular basis. These are things that we have to invest in, that we incorporate prayer into their lifestyle. We teach them what it is that Allah wants from them. Within Najaf, there was the example that was set. The old families of Najaf would explain that when we rise up for tahajjud and salatul layl at night, our young children, of the age of 2 or 3 and 4, we wake them up with us. And we give them toys to play with at that time. And they sit by us while we are busy in the acts of prayer. The purpose of this was done so that the child would become used to being awake at that time in the worship of Allah. They didn't wait for the child to become baligh or to become older, or that when he is responsible, then he'll understand his responsibilities and he'll take care of these responsibilities himself. No, the training that Imam Sadiq is talking about here, that فَأَدِّبُوهُمْ عَلَى طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ. So teach them, train them about the worship of Allah. The worship of Allah is something that's done in gradual phases that begins with conversation and education and a lifestyle that exists around it, so that they follow the example. This is what Imam Hassan alayhi salam used to talk about his mother, Fatimatu Zahra, salamullahi alayha. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He would say that I would see my mother when I would go to sleep, that she was busy in prayer. When I would wake up, I would see that she was still in the position of prayer, that her feet had been swollen and her voice was tired from the remembrance and the worship of Allah all night. Imam Hassan alayhi salam is the narrator who explains to us that he says, "Mother, I hear you praying all night, but I never hear you pray for yourself." And the lesson that Sayyidah Zahra teaches him, she says, "Ya Hassan, Ajjar thumma dar." Oh Hassan, first pray for the neighbor, then pray for yourself. Look at the multitude of lessons that are being explained in this that we're learning. One, that the prayer and worship of Sayyidah Zahra was not something separated from her children. Many times what happens is in our house, our place of prayer is a place where we have a locked door or a closed door, and the children, anytime they come in there, get out, get out, get out. This is my place of prayer. No, Sayyidah Zahra is establishing the place of prayer in a location where she is reachable by the children, and the children can be aware of her and can be understanding of what she's doing. Two, even the dua of Sayyidah Zahra is something that is audible to Imam Hassan, so that he learns how to call upon Allah. He learns how to speak to Allah, how to invocate with Allah by watching the example of his mother. Which is why he has the ability to say, "Oh mother, I heard you pray for all of these people, but you didn't pray for yourself." And the idea of the selflessness that's being taught by Sayyidah Zahra, that before you want for yourself, want for others, such that you fulfill your obligations to them and your relationship to them before you turn to Allah and ask for yourself. One of the benefits we know of this is that we see the statements of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, where he gives the explanation that whatever you ask for your brother, Allah gives to you as well. Don't be afraid that my time will run out without me asking for myself. Don't be afraid that I won't get my hajat fulfilled. Understand something. If I pray for khair for someone else without them asking, without them even knowing, Allah knows. Allah fulfills my hajat. Allah gives me guidance on the true path. These obligations that we have, that we learn from the example, this is the lesson that's being taught. When your child is a source of comfort and happiness for you, it's not simply because of the presence of the child, but because of the education and the institution you instill in that child, such that their relationship with Allah continues to improve and grow closer to Him. Now, when we want to understand how do we make our children a source of comfort for ourselves? How do we go about ensuring that they are a plant from the plants of heaven for us, that they are a source of comfort for us, that they are a source of happiness for us and sa'adah for us? We have to make sure that we fulfill their rights, and when we fulfill their rights, that then they become something great for us. We see the statements of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. يلزم الوالدين من الحقوق لولدهما ما يلزم الولد لهما من حقوقهم. That the same way that the parents have rights on their children, That a child has obligations to his parents. A child has to make sure that he listens to his parents. A child has to make sure that he respects his parents. A child has to make sure that he is according to the wishes of his parents. The same way that a child has responsibilities to his parents, parents have responsibilities to their children. But don't just imagine that this relationship that, yes, I brought this person into existence, alhamdulillah, yes, I have a slave now who will follow me and do what I want him to for the next number of years. No. The same way that that child is obligated to you, you are obligated to that child. What are the obligations that we need to ensure that we fill? To understand the obligations that we need to fulfill to our children, there's no better place to look than Risalat al-Huquq of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When we want these great things from our children, we want our children to be a source of comfort and success for us. We want to know that our children will be a coolness to our eyes, the same way that Nabi Ibrahim and Nabi Zakaria were praying for children and offspring. Why? So that they would be someone who inherits from them and is a source of great success for them. To ensure that we achieve that level, we have to make sure that we fulfill the rights of our children such that they become the upright citizens that we want. Let's take a look at Risalat al-Huquq and understand the values that Imam Zainul Abidin is ensuring that we should teach our children to ensure that we receive the greatness of the benefit that we want from them. فَأَمَّا الْحَقُّ حَقُّ وَلَدَكَ فَإِن تَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ مِنْكَ وَمُضَافًا عَلَيْكَ فِي الْعَاجِلِ الدُّنْيَا بِخَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ. Imam Zainul Abidin begins, and the right of your child is that you should know that he is from you and will be ascribed to you through both his good and his evil. We want to imagine, or the culture of our society teaches us, to allow your children to be their own people. Let them make their own decisions. Let them be independent. Teach them to be independent. This ideology of independence and giving your children freedom is from the fundamental that your child is valuable to the capitalistic system. That if your child has, especially a child, has disposable income, they don't have a mortgage, they don't have car payments, they don't have bills to pay. Therefore, the capitalistic society said, leave this person alone because we can get money from him. He's valuable to us. Don't influence his decision-making process. We're counting on this child to make mistakes or to make frivolous purchases that his desires want him to. And we intend to make profit off of it. Give him his independence and leave him alone. Or her. Let her be free. Let her do what makes her heart happy. Don't influence her decisions. And as our children grow up in this society, they want this independence from us. They want this freedom from us. And we see their peers that are going free and making decisions on their own, going to the mall alone, going to movies with each other, going to parties, going to different things without the interference of parents involved. But it's very important that we acknowledge and we understand that this isn't how our faith wants us to treat our children. This isn't the right of my child that I set him free. Rather, the right of my child is I recognize and I value his actions and I value his behavior and I ensure that he knows and that I know that his actions or her actions, my child's actions, are tied to me. If they do evil, it's written in my books. If they do good, it's written in my books. Therefore, if this person is attached to me in the way that their actions are associated with me and my heaven and hell is tied to them and their heaven and hell is tied to me, that we value each other and we pay attention to the decision-making process of our children. We stay attached to them and we influence their decisions. We guide their decisions. We're involved in their lifestyle. Don't set your children free. Don't let them make decisions on their own that they may regret for the rest of their life. Be involved in their lives. Be involved with their decisions, which is why Imam Zainul Abidin is explaining مضافا عليك في العاجل الدنيا بخيره وشره, that he is attached and ascribed to you, and his affairs and your child's affairs are written with yours from what he does in this world, whether those things be good or those things be evil. Don't be negligent of your children. Don't set them free. Now, this doesn't mean to say that, for example, we hover over our children like helicopter parents until they're 30 or until they get married, and we pass them off to their spouse and say, so long, you're done now. No, but rather the fact that we're involved in the decision-making process, in educating them and training them in good ways and paying attention, that we give them counsel, we stay associated with them, we discuss with them. Before the process that they are given their independence, they've been involved in our decision-making process throughout their life so that they make good decisions. وَأَنَّكَ مَسْئُولٌ عَمَّا وَلِيَّتُهُ بِهِ مِنْ حُسْنِ الْأَدَبِ. And it continues, you are responsible, O parents, you are responsible for what has been entrusted to you. And part of this includes now first, husn al-adab, teaching them good character, teaching them good conduct and manners. Husn al-adab is one of the most greatest fundamentals that a person, when they believe, their faith is reflected in their actions. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمُ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. Our Holy Prophet said, he said, I have been sent to you to perfect the noble characteristics. The behaviors and mannerisms that go out into society, the first thing that we do when we want our child to be a reflection of our faith is make sure that they are taught good conduct and good character. Not simply that they have the nicest possessions, not simply that they attend the best schools, but that every interaction they have is a reflection of their faith and values. One of the really important places that in today's culture, that good character is reflected and requires conversation with our children is their language. Is to ensure that foul language is not a part of our children's character. To educate them the negative aspects of foul language, and to educate them the importance and the nobility associated with separating from this language. That how can you with the same tongue call out Ya Hussein and call to that madloom imam who was the perfection of behavior and character, and with the same tongue use the foul obscenities that were the characteristics of his enemies who came against him in the field of Karbala. Good character, especially in children, is very easily and clearly demonstrated by the language that they use. And you're educating them on the language that they use is not to beat them when they use bad language in front of you. No. At this point in time, then what they do is they become scared and they use it everywhere but in front of you. That doesn't change character. That hides character. The change in character comes from this diligent conversations and sitting with your children and talking to them about the impact and the influence on their personal life, on their careers, on their communication with Allah. Oh, my child, oh, my daughter, how do you think Allah will answer your prayers when you mention His name with the same tongue that uses obscenities? How do you think Allah will answer your prayers when your tongue is more prone to using foul language that produces a stench from your mouth when you want the sweetness of dua to come from you? من حسن الأدب والدلالة على ربه. This is an important aspect, that in our raising of our children and their education, along with teaching them good character, we have the responsibility of pointing our children in the direction of their Lord. To educate our children to recognize faith and what is the faith that they need to follow. Society is of the example that raise your children to be intelligent and let them decide the faith that they should follow or how much faith they want to follow. No, the instruction of Islam, Islam itself is an inheritance that comes to our children. To protect this inheritance, we have to invest time in education to ensure that they know who Allah is and how they should connect with Allah. And that we have an obligation from an early age to introduce them and connect them to Allah and grow this process of connection in their life such that they have the confidence to know what is their faith and what it is that guides their actions. There's no wrong age to start this process. We see that in some families, this process starts from very early ages. When we look at a personality like Allama Hilli, who earns the status of ijtihad at the age of 9 years, they didn't begin educating Allama Hilli about Islam at the age of 8. Yes, come now, sit, son, let's teach you to recite Quran. No, the culture of the household was associated with thinking, pondering, discussing. Who is Allah? How do we build a relationship with Allah? What it is that Allah wants from us from an early age, that the fruit of that labor came through the generations of this work. In the example of Allama Hilli attaining ijtihad at the age of 9. Even if, for example, we don't have Allama Hilli in our house, maybe we didn't talk to our children about faith when they were young. It doesn't mean that we've lost the opportunity entirely. No, whatever age they are, we have to open the door to create the conversation. That if this child's affairs are written with mine, whatever age I become cognizant that my child needs assistance in building a connection with Allah, I should exert the effort to try and help them. I should find the resources. I should communicate myself. If I can't do it, then find the correct resources to do it. Now, one of the shortcomings and mistakes before we go on with this is the idea of saying that, yes, I fulfill this obligation of pointing my child towards Allah and teaching him how to find Allah and who is Allah. And you ask him, really, how did you do that? Well, I take them to madrasa. Once a week, on Sundays, I send them to religious education. When we look at a secular education, we see that to produce a successful, functional adult who functions in society and has a good understanding, that the necessity of education is 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. That 40 hours a week, we need to put this child in an immersive environment to give them the education that they need to be able to become a successful adult. The concept that I can give my child a sufficient education to go into heaven by only giving him 4 to 6 hours of education once a week is foolhardiness on our behalf. Madrasa is one of the tools that we utilize, is one of the support systems we have to ensure that our children are attached to Allah. These children require our continuous involvement in creation of culture on a daily basis about Allah to ensure that they become and have a strong, deep relationship with Allah, so that when difficulty befalls them, questions befall them, that they know that what is Allah's role in their life and how do they stay attached to Allah. The investment we have to make is far greater than simply just we take them to Sunday school and inshallah that's enough. No, Sunday school is a tool. It creates a social environment. It creates a classroom environment. It gives them access to resources, topics of discussion. But those are introductions. The work has to continue at home. The culture has to be established at home. There has to be an environment of involvement at home. Whether we are the parents of this child, whether we are the grandparents of this child, the aunts and uncles of children, or whichever role and capacity as older friends, as cousins, as siblings, we all have the opportunity and the need to be involved in the upbringing of a child, and that becomes a source of forgiveness for all of us. That's when we invest in the education of that child and teaching them of the correct culture of faith, Allah creates it as a system of forgiveness for us. We continue. وَدَلَالَةُ عَلَى رَبِّهِ وَالْمَعُونَةِ لَهُ عَلَى طَاعَتِهِ, and then teach him and helping him to obey his Lord. That we are involved in ensuring that, especially in the early phases, we make sure that we teach our child to pray correctly, by not simply by saying, okay, you're baligh now, go and pray. No, remind them of the time, help them in their fasting, be aware and cognizant of their efforts. فَاعْمَلْ فِي أَمْرِهِ عَمَلَ مَنْ يَعْمِلُ أَنَّهُ مُثَابَ عَلَى إِحْسَانٍ إِلَيْهِ وَمُعَاقِبُ عَلَى إِسَاءَةٍ إِلَيْهِ. The Imam continues, he says, and helping your child to obey Allah, so act, now the Imam is explaining, so act toward your children with the action and the intention of one who knows that you will be rewarded for the good that you do towards this child and punished for the evil doing. These points of taking into consideration that my relationship with children and these children is something so important that they become a source of reward for me, and if they go wrong and in the wrong way, that they are a source of punishment for me, is a way of looking at an investment that continues to give dividends if I invest it correctly. And this becomes important because we take a look and we see that for a person, it's said that when they die, their book of deeds is closed. There's no adding to it. There's no changing it. And that desire to add or change our book of deeds is so significant that Allah explains in Surah Al-Munafiqun, says that at the time of death, that the person will ask, he will say, oh Allah, لولا أخرتني إلى أجل قريب. Why couldn't you delay me to a little bit of time? لأصدق وأكن من الصالحين. So that I could give charity and become a good person, that I could do more good deeds. I want to do more good deeds. Allah, at the time of my death, I worry I haven't done enough good. This is why the Imam explains that there are some things that we leave behind that continue to do good for us, that continue to change our book of deeds after our death. One is the Quran that we leave behind that is read after us. That if we are those who spread out and to express the word of Allah and increase the presence of the Quran, that those Quran that we left for people to read and for people to benefit from will be a source of goodness and assistance to us after we go to our grave. The second, the Imam points out, is the tree that you plant that benefits society after you. That those trees that we go and we invest in the improvement of society by planting trees, as long as that tree is present and gives benefit on this earth, I will receive reward for it. The water that I helped either by one, digging a well, or two, establishing plumbing resources, or created some access of running water to people, as long as people and society receive benefit from that water, I will continue to receive thawab after my book of deeds has been closed. The next that the Imam mentions is, he says, the upright child who seeks forgiveness for him. That's every child that I train in a good way, every child that I invest in to be a good person, that child, as long as they grow up and they move in the right direction of Allah and that they seek forgiveness for me, that when I'm dead and in my ground and I have nothing that I can do to improve my condition, I can't now earn heaven anymore, I can't protect myself from hell, that child will be a wasila for me to change my book of deeds and continue to improve my condition. And the final point the Imam mentions is that good deed that you establish on this earth that continues on after you. And this point is very significant, that whether we have children or not, whether we have the opportunity to have our own kids that we take care of, or Allah hasn't blessed us with them yet, it doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to invest in improving our condition and making sure that our deeds, good deeds, continue to be added to after we die. Rather, the example of teaching in these madrasas, talking to children, to helping someone in need, to teaching someone a good action, all of these things that we do are things that will benefit us after our death and will continue to improve our good deeds. So whether we teach in a madrasa, we talk and say, have a good relationship with children when we come to the masjid or we see them in society, whether I take the time to help someone who is suffering through a difficulty to correct their difficulty. Allah has said that all of these things that you do and you set good examples in society, they will be sawab jariyah, qari khair, that continues for you after you've gone on this earth. And those are very important aspects for us, that we are in need of them. And this was something that we saw, the relationship with children, the kindness to children, was an example established by the Ahlul Bayt and by our holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When we see the example of Rasulullah, that he says, I wish for a tradition to continue on after me. And that tradition is the greeting and saying Salamu alaikum to small children. The Prophet is teaching us the value of these children. And he says it's from my tradition. The good deed that the Prophet says I leave behind is greeting small children, showing them that you notice them, speaking to them. The Ahlul Bayt, we look at the example of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, whose love for orphans and children was famous and renowned, that he would care for them and show them kindness to an extent where when a child or an orphan would be abused, and the first person that they would go to would be Imam Ali. Imam Hassan was Kareem Ahlul Bayt, the generous of the Ahlul Bayt. His examples of showing kindness to children and people were famous. Or you look at the example of even Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam, who was famous that wherever he would go, groups of children would follow him. They would accompany him wherever he would go. Which is why what they did to the children of Imam al-Hussain is an atrocity in itself and a source of pain for Abu Abdullah itself. The two children that we know were the innocent, and their example is given to us as an example of showing the evil nature of the enemy against which Imam al-Hussain stood, were the two children of Rabab. One was that Asghar, that if you may say that Abu Abdullah committed any crime, or that Abu Abdullah was desirous of any worldly gain, na'uzubillah, that you would say that then why would the enemy kill the 6-month-old child of Abu Abdullah? Why would an enemy raise the head of a 6-month-old child on a spear? That they describe when this Asghar was shaheed in the arms of Abu Abdullah, that he flapped like a fish out of water in the hands of Abu Abdullah after he was struck with an arrow. That this Asghar was the only one who had a grave dug for him in the field of Karbala. This was the only shaheed who was not brought into the tents to bid his farewell to all of the women of Banu Hashim and the Ahlul Bayt. Every shaheed was honored that they would be brought back to the tents so that they could be bid farewell for their sacrifice. Even Muhammad, when they were brought into the tents, that the women came to pay respects to the children of Sayyidah Zainab. Because Sayyidah Zainab, whenever any shaheed would come in, whether it was the son, whether it was the brother, the spouse, the father, she was the first one to sit and make dua, may Allah accept your sacrifice. Oh women, for your love of Ahlul Bayt, have patience, my mother will intercede for you. So when the children of Sayyidah Zainab came in, the women gathered, but they said, Zainab is not present. Zainab has not come to bid farewell to her children. Then Imam al-Hussain went and got Zainab and said, Zainab, come and bid farewell to your boys. That Sayyidah Zainab sat between the chests of Awlad Muhammad, placed a hand on each chest and said, Oh Allah, accept from us this sacrifice. Asghar, the son of Rabab, is the only one not given this honor. And the reason explained was to say that should he enter, he was taken with seeking water, that if they brought him back now with an arrow in his neck, the children might become too frightened or become scared of how evil this enemy is, that the child asked for water and he was given an arrow in reply. Abu Abdullah did not enter the tents with Asghar, but rather dug a small grave behind the tents so as to hide the body of Asghar on the day of Ashura. But hi, Asghar, how mal'oon was the enemy that they did not even spare you, that they took your body from the grave that was dug and raised your head on a spear. Such is the example that we saw of the evil nature in the battlefield, that maybe one could say that in the heat of battle that some evil deeds were committed and that some things like this happen in battle. But what was the excuse of the daughter of Imam al-Hussein? That 4 year old daughter that they described, that Khuli himself said that on the day of Ashura, when I went back to the tents after the killing of Hussein, I heard that they had begun the looting of the tents of Hussein ibn Ali. I went running to see if there was anything left to loot, but that most of the possessions had been taken by the others. I saw one child who was a small girl who still had earrings in her ears. So I ran to her and I ripped them from her ears. They said, "Oh, Khuli, why did you have to rip her earrings?" He said, "I was afraid that someone else should take them before me, so I wanted to take them right away, so I ripped them from her ears." Oh, Khuli, what happened then? He says, "I saw this small child. She turned to me with her ears bleeding from my action, and she called out, 'Oh, person, did you not know we are from the family of Banu Hashim? Had you but asked me, I would have given them to you. You did not have to rip them from my ears.'" Such was the nobility and the innocence of the children of Imam Hussein. Such was the example of the 4 year old daughter of Imam al Hussein. This daughter was the one who was tortured from this day until the time that she entered into the prison of Sham. This description of this child in the prison of Sham is one who, when they would look out the window, they would see the birds that were flying, and she would ask her brother, say, Imam Zain al Abidin, Sayyid al Sajidin, "Oh, brother, where do these birds go when they leave in the morning?" And he replied, "They go out to seek their sustenance and to find their food. And then when they come back, where are they coming back to? They come back to their homes in the evening." And this child asked, "Oh, brother, will there be a time where we can return to our home too?" Oh, Sayyidah Sakina, your example is one that you will be the one who will not have the chance to return to Medina, because there is no Medina to return for you. Yours was the love of that of your father that is no more. Imam Zainul Abidin describes that in one night, this child, the attribution is to Imam Zainul Abidin, that the description comes that in one night, Sakina awoke crying. And she cried and she said, "You have kept my father away from me, but I have seen my father. Where is he?" Sayyidah Sakina, the pains of death would be so difficult that Abu Abdullah came to prepare you for this moment. And he told you that soon you will be returned to me. Sayyidah Sakina has many complaints to recite to her father. She has to complain about how her earrings were stolen, how her clothing was lit on fire, how when she would cry that they would strike her, how they kept her under the hot sun, how they would not give her food and water. "Baba, how they've locked me in this prison and I can't see the light of day. I can't go outside." They said that this child began to weep and was inconsolable. They said, "Sakina, why are you crying?" She said that you told me that my father is on a journey, but I have seen my father. I want to go to Baba. Sakina would cry, the women would cry. The sounds of the crying were raised to where the Mal'oon Yazid heard. Why does the child cry? The soldiers replied that she cries in search for her father. So Yazid Mal'un says, "Give her her father then." They took the tasht, the basin in which was the head of Abu Abdullah, covered it with a cloth and presented it before the crying girl. She said, "You bring me food, I don't want food." They said, "Uncover the bowl, it is not food." Sayyidah Sakina looks inside this basin and sees the head of her father. The famous poetry that's narrated at this moment is this child looks at the head of her father and she says, "Oh, Baba, who has cut your veins? Who has colored your beard with your blood? Who has orphaned me in a young age?" After this, they narrate that the child touched her lips to the head of Abu Abdullah and became unconscious. After some time, the call was given, child, wake up. Sakina, wake up. Wake up, but the child would wake up no more. She had died from the grief of seeing the head of Abu Abdullah. The Masahib of Sayyidah Sakina don't end here. Rather, that when the ghusl was to be given to her, that the women refused to give the ghusl to this child. When it was asked, why do you refuse? They said her body is covered in a way that we don't understand, that maybe she was diseased. They said, what do you mean? Her body is black and blue. If she has some disease, we don't want it. Oh, women of Sham, this child's body is black and blue because they would beat this child whenever she would cry at the separation of her father. It is narrated that Sayyidina Zainab then went to do the ghusl and called out, "O Sajjad, how shall I take off the clothes when they have grown in with the flesh of Sakina?" Sayyidina Sakina's body had been burned by the fires on the day of Ashura, and no treatment was given to her wounds, such that the clothing grew in with her skin. Imam Zain al-Abidin is said to have called out, "Oh, Auntie Zainab, don't remove her clothes. Bury Sakina just like this. Let her go to her father just like this." ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. Let's raise our hands in dua. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. يا الله 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 بحق حسين وجده وأبيه وأمه وأخيه وتسعة المعصومين من ذريته. Oh Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Oh Allah, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Oh Allah, there are those amongst our families, our communities, the mu'mineen, the muslimin, the people of this world who are suffering through sickness and disease. Ya Allah, give shifa'ah to the people, the mu'mineen, the muslimin, wherever they are in this world. Oh Allah, we have come to you with hajat, fulfill our hajat. Oh Allah, there are those of us in difficulty, remove our difficulties. Ya Allah, guide our children on the upright religion of Ali Muhammad. Oh Allah, make us from the supporters of Sahibul Zaman. Hasten the reappearance of Sahibul Zaman.